Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Nebel. I'm the Graduate Assistant of Sports Sciences for Auburn University baseball team. I'm also a PhD student in the Sports Medicine and Movement Lab headed by Gretchen Oliver at Auburn University in the Department of Kinesiology. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the influence of leverage index on pitching biomechanics. The first thing that I wanted to do is thank everybody for attending today, as well as thanking SABR for hosting a great event, and thanking my co-authors, Kevin Giordano from Holy Cross Hospital in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as well as Ben Lurch. He's a master's student in our lab as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. A little bit of background on what I was kind of looking at. I wanted to investigate, based off of some research by David Whiteside in 2016, that suggested that release point variability and release point consistency were actually very important on season-long outcomes in pitching performance. So FIP, ERA were both negatively correlated with the consistency of release point. Additionally, in terms of biomechanics, we've got it's been shown that the consistency of the release point also is indicative of the consistency of the plate location at the final position of the pitch. So taking both of those things, we can kind of interpret that having a very consistent release point means that we can then be consistent in where the pitch is going to end up. From a sports psychology aspect of it, choking under pressure is a big phenomenon that means that we would severely underperform in what we're actually trying to accomplish based on when the situation has the most pressure. With that being said, there's evidence out there that supports a multifaceted approach to the phenomenon of choking under pressure. One of their biggest findings in that was that motor control was altered. Motor control being movement variability, and just consistency of movement patterns in single motions, such as throwing darts, as well as gross motor patterns, such as walking on a balance beam. So where does that bring us? That brings us to the purpose of my presentation, which was to identify if there was a change in release parameter variability based off of leverage index. Our hypothesis for this was that the arm slot variability would increase as leverage index situation also increases, similar to the consistency with those motor control alterations seen in the sports psychology research, indicative of choking under pressure. So to give a little bit of a background on what leverage index is, it's a gauge essentially of how big of a swing in win expectancy we can kind of expect in a given situation based off of runners on base, based off of runners on base, score differential, innings, and other factors as well. So we chose to bucket it out into high, moderate, and low. So greater than 1.5 is going to be our high group. In between 1.5 and 0.7 is going to be our moderate, and then low is anything below 0.7. And I provided some examples up there just to show that there are going to be different leverage situations throughout every single game, where the bottom of the ninth is not going to be the same as the top of the second. And the top of the second might not be the same if it's a 1-run game versus a 4-run game. So what did we do for this research presentation? We collected data on 35 NCAA Division I collegiate baseball pitchers. The inclusion criteria is that they were required to be a part of, obviously, a Division I baseball team, but they were also required to have their primary position be a pitcher. They had to have thrown at least 15 fastballs in a game under our recorded system. And of those 15 fastballs, 5 had to be in each of our leverage buckets that we defined previously. All of our kinematics were measured using an 8-camera Marcoless motion capture system using Kinetrax software. That was all sampled at 300 frames per second. And we worked with Kinetrax to get those kinematics out of that. All of our ball flight data, as well as the game by game or pitch by pitch metrics, that correspond with leverage index were extrapolated using TrackMan V3 Stadium unit. And then custom Python scripts were used to sync those two. So what were our methods? Like I was explaining, we estimated our leverage index based off of the calculations from Tom Tango in the book Playing by the Numbers, as well as there's a great online resource from insidethebook.com. Arm slot was the angle. I thought I was going to have a picture on here, but it's the angle between the vector of the hand and the shoulder. So if you were to think from here where the clicker is to my shoulder and then straight up in the air, that's our arm slot angle, where this is going to be straight above overhead is going to be 0 and parallel to the ground is going to be 90. The statistical analysis that we performed was a repeated measures ANOVA based off of the different buckets of leverage index. And we used post hoc analyses to identify any different or at what level these differences were occurring. So what we found was that there was a significant difference in arm slot variability based off of the buckets the leverage buckets. And the biggest finding was that we had a difference between the high and low leverage index scenarios, where in the high leverage, we experienced 3 degrees plus or minus 2.8 degrees of variability in the arm slot, whereas in the low, it was 2.3 to 2.3 degrees. All other pairings were not statistically significant. And as you could see, visualizations were supposed to be added. Somehow they didn't make it on here. But anyways, to give an example of that, 1 degree alteration can change a pitch that's going middle to missing the strike zone completely. So we're already seeing 3 degrees of alterations just naturally in our high leverage situations. And when we break that down even further, when we're looking at high leverage versus low leverage, there's a 0.7 degree difference in variability right there. So we're essentially assuming that the variability of that leverage is influencing enough to make a pitch that we want to go middle, potentially miss the strike zone completely. This does kind of concur with the findings of the sports psychology research in choking under pressure. We're trying to get as consistent results as possible, meaning that we're trying to produce the most consistent movement as possible. And then obviously motor patterns are going to change when those when the stress is high on that. Some future directions that we're looking to go with this research is going to be a mediation moderation analysis on leverage index, as well as balls and strikes and the arm slot variability, or just the arm slot in general, to see if it's really a chicken or an egg situation where guys are getting more influenced or more stressed out in a high pressure situation, and that's causing them to throw balls, but their arm slot's staying the same, or is it because their arm slot's changing that they're throwing more balls, irrelevant to the leverage? We don't know yet. We also want to take a deeper look into individual analyses of the overperformers and underperformers of these types of research questions. So why do some guys really perform well when the lights are brightest and they need to get an out, versus some guys sync to their level of training potentially, and that level of training may not be up to snuff for the out that they need to get. Overall, thank you all for listening, and I'm open to any questions, and also War Eagle for any Auburn baseball fans.
Thank you for a good talk. I really appreciate it. It occurred to me late in your talk that there might be a confounding factor that you might need to adjust for, and that is fatigue. Is it possible that you always have a higher leverage situation later in the game, and that, I mean, granted, we're now rotating in pitchers a lot more, so maybe it's less of an issue, but I don't know if that's something you'd be able to try to control for in your future work.
Yeah, so similar to the last presentation, my next approach on this is going to be taking a linear mixed model approach. So confounding for some of those variables, giving each person their own regression line. In this portion of it, we couldn't, but we were attempting to negate that just because leverage situations, while they're more high leverage situations, while are more prominent in later innings, don't always have to occur in later innings. Thank you.
So I think it was in your talk yesterday that you talked about like how you can't adjust or like go to a coach over like a 3-degree arm change or arm angle. So with seeing the difference with just a 1 degree, like how do you incorporate that and like show that to coaches and such?
Yeah, I really wish that I would have double checked and made sure that the images were on here, but I had an image that overlaid one of our pitchers' arm angle change, and it was a 5-degree arm angle change. And to the naked eye, you can't see a difference. So it's one of those things where we can measure it and we can identify that there is a difference. From the naked eye, we can't identify that, and that makes it that much more difficult. So we can't do any sort of addressing that issue until afterwards. When that occurs, that's up to, I work closely with our pitching coach to try and help solve these solutions, but he's got a much better baseball brain than I do. So I let him kind of work on those aspects and I'll crunch the numbers for him.
I have 2 questions. Is there anything physical that happens in a high pressure situation that causes the pitcher to be off by, even though it's just 1 degree, but it causes a big difference?
And that's a tough question just because each individual pitcher will respond differently. There's been research in that motor control area that suggests that gross motor patterns in general have alterations slightly. So it could be a little bit of trunk lean, a little bit of extra trunk lean, a little bit less shoulder abduction. So how the body in total is moving is going to end up affecting the release parameters at the very end of the ball, even if it's just minute, half a degree here, half a degree there. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that does. I have one more question to add on to that. So if you worked with the sports psychologist, were there any tools that players were able to use in these high pressure situations on the field, like such as some type of a breathing technique?
Yeah, so I default all of that training aspects of the sports psychology to our sports psychologist. However, they talk with our players on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to give them more tools. As we've seen with some of the pitch clock and rule change panels, those things are also happening at the collegiate level, not to the same extent, but we don't have as many mound visits as we used to. We don't have as much time between pitches as we used to. So they're having to also make those adjustments. And if they can't make those adjustments, then that's a later issue that we're going to have to deal with when we're not about to give up 3 runs.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Awesome. Thank you all.